I think I've gotten everything correctly aligned. Oh, that's something that does not work. So I'd like to thank first the organizers for, is this on? Thank the organizers for inviting me to come and talk. And responding to the comment, my objective here is to convince you that planetary protection is not just a treaty obligation, it's also a good idea and actually an essential part of responsible exploration. Clicker. Slides. So it's actually useful for me to be going at the end of the day because I'll be able to use all of the information that you've heard throughout the presentations earlier to highlight the areas in which planetary protection is really a very critical aspect of exploration. So the intention that, the reason that we're exploring, one of them anyway, or several of them, is to understand the origin, distribution, and future of life in the universe. We have, of course, an example of life on Earth being the N of 1 that we know about life having begun and continued to exist. The question, one of the reasons we explore is to understand what might have happened elsewhere. And there are a number of complexities in trying to answer that question when we're coming from Earth, because Earth is covered in life. There are organisms on us. There are organisms in a variety of environments. As was mentioned during the Mars science session earlier today, everywhere we look on Earth, we find organisms, we find life, we find indicators of past life, we find current life. And this makes it very difficult as we try to go elsewhere because anything we send is going to be covered in a background of Earth life. So when we're looking at deep beneath South Africa in mines, we find communities that not only have microorganisms, but also have several trophic levels, including nematode worms, that live off the bacteria that are in this deep subsurface, that are surviving from the radioactive decay of the rocks around them. Radioactive decay produces protons. Protons are, of course, hydrogen ions, and therefore, the energy produced by radioactive decay is what these organisms use to base an entire community. If you took that material and put it into the subsurface of Mars in an environment similar to what Jim Green mentioned as warm rocks in contact with water that might be producing the methane that is observed at the Gale crater site, these communities from Earth wouldn't be able to tell the difference. They could quite easily survive if they were put into a similar location on Mars. One of the challenges that we have with communities of life on Earth is that they can modify the environment that they exist in to make them more congenial for the organisms that are present. Forests, of course, and jungles are very congenial for a wide variety of organisms, but even somewhere like Yellowstone National Park, where it appears to be a very harsh, hostile environment, there are still a range of communities, and in fact, the entire environment there is not barren inorganic compounds. It's actually the dead bodies of organisms that have lived there in the past. That's a field site that I haven't gone to, but places like the Atacama Desert, it's more difficult to find life. Still, everywhere we look on Earth, we do find life. As I mentioned, life is also on us. If you actually look at the skin, the community that's on your skin, there are tens of thousands of organisms in a square centimeter. Overall, inside of a human, there are several orders of magnitude more microbial cells than there are eukaryotic cells that have human DNA in them. So we are not actually human. We're actually microbes living in a shell of eukaryotic cytoplasm. So this is a challenge if we're going to go somewhere else and look for non-Earth life. We actually have evidence that even organisms that you wouldn't necessarily expect, such that the organisms that can turn cheese red or orange or some peculiar color in your refrigerator, some of those organisms can survive and thrive in the surface conditions on Mars when we put them in Mars chambers. As long as they're, as I say, have an umbrella and a cold drink, they need to be sheltered from UV light, and in a 100%, in a relatively humid atmosphere environment, the kind of environment you would find on the inside of a salt crystal if there were a little hollow in the middle of a salt crystal. So these organisms that are readily available, if you had pizza this afternoon, you probably have them in your mouth. Some of them can survive on the surface of Mars. Again, that is a concern if we're trying to go to Mars to look for life. A very critical aspect, a very critical consideration that planetary protection keeps in mind, and is actually one of the reasons that planetary protection was founded, is that when you introduce organisms into environments, they can have unexpected consequences. Rabbits in Australia are one example. Salmonella in your lunch, if you left it sit a little too long, is another example, which I hope nobody here is suffering from. But the introduction of infectious organisms into one's intestinal system will disrupt the ecosystem of your intestines for multiple generations, tens to hundreds of generations. That's a very long period of time. 100 generations or 10 generations of humans is several hundred years. Fortunately, microbes have a shorter lifespan than we do, but still, that kind of an ecological impact, those consequences are dramatic in terms of understanding the ecosystem into which these novel organisms have been introduced. So invasive species present a real challenge to understanding the natural environment relative to an altered environment caused by humans moving things around, which we do often on Earth. So those kinds of concerns, the observations of life on Earth and the changes that can happen as we move life around on Earth, was one of the stimuli for planetary protection. Of course, concerns about planetary protection have been in existence since before the launch of Sputnik, before the dawn of the space age. H.G. Wells wrote only one example, which, if you look at the War of the Worlds from the standpoint of the Martians, that's actually something that we might be wanting to be concerned about as we go to Mars. Here is this ancient and advanced civilization, which sees this other planet that they're trying to back up their system. They want to find an additional place to put their colonies so that they don't have to rely on being a single planet civilization. They go there. They can see, yeah, there's some organisms there, but they don't think it's a real problem. They start spreading their own organisms. The red grass grows on either New Jersey or England, depending on which particular version of the War of the Worlds you choose to look at. But then they start having problems. Both the humans, the native species are fighting back, the macroscopic ones, but also the microscopic ones. And in H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds, the thing that actually killed off the Martians were the microbes, not the humans. That is a very prescient concern relative to the possibility that there might be organisms on Mars that could interfere with whatever future activities humans want to do at Mars. For planetary protection in particular, there is another additional aspect which is always nice, which always makes the War of the Worlds a nice example, because of course Orson Welles in 1938 turned it into a radio play, and that radio play either caused a major media upheaval in the northeast of the United States, or was reported in the media to have caused a major media upheaval, depending on which version, again, you believe. But the point is that public perceptions of space exploration, and in particular public perceptions of the potential for organisms to contaminate either other planets or the Earth, is a very important consideration as we do exploration, because it's the public that pays for what we do. Good representations in the media can, like The Martian perhaps, can increase public acceptance and public interest in funding additional space exploration. Negative perceptions in the media can have the opposite effect. And that's one of the things that planetary protection is definitely a part of my job, to try to make sure that the actual steps that we take to do effective exploration and protect both ourselves and whatever other planets we choose to protect are done correctly and communicated correctly, so that the rest of the world knows what we're doing and feels like whatever some space agency is doing is being done in a responsible manner and isn't going to cause something like the Andromeda strain or the War of the Worlds as we proceed. So there is an international framework, as was mentioned, for planetary protection. Article 9 of the Outer Space Treaty does specify that states party to the treaty, and that's over 100 at the moment, shall explore other planets so as to avoid their harmful contamination, and also to avoid adverse changes to the environment of the Earth resulting from the introduction of extraterrestrial matter. So if we go other places, we should avoid contaminating them in a harmful fashion. If we bring samples back, we should make sure that we're not going to adversely affect the environment of the Earth as we do that. What is meant by harmful contamination is up to the scientific community to determine, actually the international community. Currently, that is being the policy for planetary protection is being maintained by the Committee on Space Research of the International Council for Science. That's a parallel structure to the way that the National Research Council in the US advises the US government. The International Council for Science advises the UN. And that international policy is a policy that all space agencies, well, that is maintained to support compliance with the Outer Space Treaty so that everybody is using the same playing field. It doesn't make sense for, it doesn't make sense for people to, for one space agency to be very careful if other ones are not. And I'm going to speed up quite rapidly because I somehow thought I had at least 5 more minutes than I've been told I have. So the point of the planetary protection policy is to minimize the unintended consequences of human exploration. We know that we've had unintended consequences on Earth. Avoiding them in the future is, as we explore other parts of the solar system, is an important criterion. The way that we do this is based on our best understanding of the environments that we're exploring, as well as our understanding of the capabilities of Earth life, life being one of the major things that we are concerned about with regard to planetary protection contamination, because life can reproduce. So as you're going to places, other objects, the concern is whether Earth organisms can survive there. So if you're going to any objects, most of the objects in the solar system where Earth organisms cannot survive, the moon, asteroids, most small solar system bodies, Venus, that those locations are good places to practice for human exploration of Mars, or for any exploration of Mars, because we can go there and not be worried about contaminating those locations. If you're going somewhere like Phobos or Deimos, which are close to Mars and may actually have recent Mars material on them, there may be a concern for bringing samples back to the Earth, but the places that you might be bringing samples back to Earth from that are of concern for planetary protection are specifically places that have environments that look as if they could host biochemistries similar to the life we observe on Earth. So Mars, Europa, and Enceladus are the places that we're worried about from the standpoint of planetary protection. The rest of them, there is no concern for contamination, so there's no restrictions on what happens there. NASA has our policy for planetary protection distributed over multiple documents. We have an overarching document that applies to all use of NASA assets, regardless of who's using them. We have a specific set of requirements with implementation for robotic missions. We have a guideline for human missions that describes how we're going to go about developing specific requirements. Those requirements are still in flux because we are at the moment trying, so I'll go back. So at the moment we have guidelines at the international level saying basically be responsible. Don't do things that are going to cause problems in other places. When you bring material back to the Earth, be careful. How to do that in the context of humans, which are of course covered in microbes, is something that we're still figuring out. For the first missions, we want to be careful, but as we progress to subsequent missions, when we know more, we can tailor the requirements according to what we know. So the concern for planetary protection is to protect the locations that we're trying to study to the extent that we're trying to study them. Also, absolutely protect the environment of the Earth. That's the top priority. The question of should you leave one astronaut on Mars if you can bring 5 of them back? The Martians in War of the Worlds faced the problem, if you've got a colony that's infected, do you let any of them come back? To protect the safety of the Earth, the answer would be no. The point that John Grunsfeld made is that we have been exploring Mars for about 50 years now, but that's very early, and this pointer does not work at all. We are there at the little red square. We're very early in the overall exploration of Mars. We may eventually want to get to future human use, colonization, any of the things that anybody would choose to do. That's a decision that we can make, but we want to make it on the basis of understanding the information that we can collect early on. To explore Mars in a responsible way, we need to take a phased approach. It's absolutely trivial to find life on Mars. All we need to do is bring it with us. So if we want to find Mars life, that's a different problem. Every lander that we've sent to Mars has found evidence of life on Mars, evidence of intelligent life on Mars, because every lander that we've sent to Mars has taken pictures of spacecraft, but they weren't from Mars, they were from Earth. The other consideration as we're looking at future exploration is that if we introduce organisms that are problematic, we may not understand early the consequences for those future explorers. So it isn't just to protect science that we do planetary protection. It's also to protect any future interests at Mars, both for colonization and use later, but early to protect the science and the ability to answer those questions about whether there's life, a separate origin of life elsewhere in the universe. I'll stop there and leave it open for questions. Okay. Okay. I can't see, so I guess somebody there. I'll repeat it. Yeah. Yes, you.
Is there any scenario whereby you can see the activity of Mars 1 being in compliance with your policy of planetary protection?
So
the question, is there any scenario where you can see the activities of Mars 1, should they occur, as being in compliance with your policies of planetary protection?
So Mars 1 actually has several activities that they're doing. They are planning to purchase a robotic spacecraft from Lockheed Martin. Lockheed Martin has already been talking to me. It's a repeat of the Phoenix and InSight spacecraft. In that case, there's no reason that they would not be compliant. From the position of sending a one-way human mission to Mars and leaving people on the surface, alive or dead, if it's contained, if you bake the people as soon as they're dead, or cremate them, or in some other way kill off all the microbes, there is no obvious, that would be compliant. The point is to leave viable organisms on Mars. A concentrated collection of organic compounds that we know of which we know the location would not be a violation of planetary protection policy. How you would go about doing that is a very different question. You can send the living organisms to Mars as long as you kill them before they get out. Oh, I've just been told I may take more questions. Yeah, thank you. Yes, I started 5 minutes late and I was given 15 minutes and I've just now been given liberty to talk more. So please, more questions if anyone has them. Bueller? Sorry, I can't see. If somebody shouts
Hi, so way over here. So just to follow up on that last question, so specifically when they're planning to send the Spanish experiment as part of the robotic mission to Mars and grow a plant on Mars, you don't have a problem with that?
So it happens that in my graduate work, I actually did plant cell culture. And so I am rather more familiar than I might want to be with the fact that it is possible to grow plants in sterile cell culture where the only cells in that culture system are plant cells. There are no microbial cells present. In that case, that would represent one organism, and it's very definitely an organism that would not be able to survive on the surface of Mars. Under those circumstances, a single plant or even a collection of 10 seeds would not violate, 100 seeds. We get 500,000 organisms per spacecraft landing event, so 100 plants would not be a problem, as long as it's only plants and no microbes.
Very much a hypothetical, but if we were to discover any life on Mars, would that mean the terraforming would be forbidden by any treaty?
That is a decision that would be made at the time. The slide that I didn't talk about very much was going through the practice of how we make determinations about planetary protection. Every mission the specific requirements for any particular mission are based on the best available scientific and other understandings at the time. So if we discovered life on Mars and people wanted to reject Carl Sagan's premise that Mars should be left to the Martians, that is a decision that would be made at the time. At the moment, I don't have enough information to say. So people make the decision on a mission-by-mission basis on the basis of taking into account all of the information that's available at the time that mission gets performed.
Hi, Cassie. I was a little surprised by your discussion of the cheese microbes, because I wasn't aware that that milestone had been achieved to getting things grown to grow under Mars conditions. It wasn't clear whether you were saying they propagated or simply grew, and if so, whether that was under a sort of realistic Mars temperature profile or not.
So the work was done by Andy Sugar down at Florida. And the conditions were with temperatures slightly lower than 0 degrees. So and those were organisms, bacteria that normally do not grow in conditions where there's wide variety of diurnal cycling, wide variety of humidity changes. So that was pretty much a proof of concept case. There's been other work looking at lichens, where they actually do cycle in Mars conditions. Lichens are known on Earth to be able to absorb humidity out of the atmosphere. They don't even need liquid water. So we are learning more about organisms on Earth that suggest that the conditions under which they can survive are more closer to what we observe on Mars than was previously understood.
But again, is that survival or propagation?
Propagation.
Thank you.
Propagation, yes. That is replication, so they're making more of themselves. Yeah.
How much is planetary protection costing us? Do we sacrifice deeply for it, or is it incidental?
It depends on how you do it. If you integrate it into the beginning of your mission, as was done on Viking, it's actually impossible to tease out the costs because it's not a separate set of costs. It's just part of the basic cost of doing business. That was Tom Young's premise on the Viking, as the Viking project manager. If you try to impose it late in the game after your hardware has been completely already designed, on the MER spacecraft, there was a study done by the Jet Propulsion Lab looking at the cost to re-engineer the Mars exploration rovers to be compliant with a full system sterilization prior to launch. That was estimated in 2005-ish dollars to be about 100 million. But once you figure out how to do it, it's cheaper on subsequent missions. A similar study by the ESA, by the European Space Agency, looking at the ExoMars, came up with a similar number, 80 to 100 million euros. But that's a one-time upfront cost, and then once you figure out how, it becomes cheaper in future missions. And that was to retrofit. If you integrate it in from the beginning, it's not that much. There are apocryphal estimates of 10% of the Viking number, but even that was about 100 million in equivalent dollars. So the claim that it's extraordinarily expensive is probably greatly exaggerated. I think that's it. Thank you very much.